Time with Herman and Sharron.
All right, we have a special guest today, Sharron.
Yes, we do.
You look so nice.
Thank you.
Should I tell a story about what happened to us?
I don't know. I have no idea where you're going.
I'm just kidding. She
always scares me when he does
She stands
that.
in fear of what am I going to say that I don't want him to say, and I can't stop him.
No, they're at the key right there. I cannot stop him. So every once in a while I let him have it under the table here, but nobody can see it. But doesn't stop him anyway.
I know. She's more in control of me than you think she
right.
is.
Yeah.
We have William J. Federer with
Yes.
us today. As I said, if you've watched other programs, he's one of my favorites.
He's going to be teaching us about history. That's what he's good at.
And
He fills us in.
we're talking about past and current. I mean,
Yes.
the guy is, I don't know how anybody can have a mind like his, but I guess God just blessed him with a one of a kind.
Yeah.
Because
He remembers
he
what he
remembers
reads.
everything. I mean, it's just, but would you welcome today's program, William J. Federer, the most
Here he
brilliant
comes.
guy that I know.
He's one of our regulars, you
Oh,
know.
great to be
I know.
with you. Great to be
I
with you,
know.
Herman.
You are now one of our regulars.
Yeah, that's
Oh,
right.
thank you. It's an
Yeah,
honor.
and he has his own program.
Because we're learning.
He has his own program. He has radio programs. He's a current speaker. You speak in a lot of churches, conventions.
He was just in Colorado.
Yes, yes.
You like Colorado?
I do. It's really pretty.
Yeah.
Tell him about the church you were in. I thought that was so interesting, about where the pastor stands.
Yeah, it was Kuchara Christian Fellowship, Pastor Mike Christian, and it's way up in the mountains in southern Colorado. And it's an A-frame church with a glass window on the back. So the pastor's standing there, it's all glass behind him, and there's the mountains.
Oh,
Isn't that neat? All
And
glass behind
you can see
him.
the hawks flying by. You can see the
Oh, my
pigs. It's like
goodness.
really,
I would
really
love
beautiful.
oh,
that.
that is like a
And,
dream.
So it's like God's creation right behind him.
It
while he's
is.
speaking.
It is.
It's
And,
neat.
and
William, see how much I love the mountains? Look at behind my little.
I noticed. I noticed.
yeah.
Yes.
Right.
And on the church property, they have the cabin that Lawrence Welk owned.
Oh, that's
so,
right. Yeah, you told me that.
Yeah.
Actually there?
Yeah, it's just like a two-room cabin, but
That's
he
where
had
he
it all the way
stayed?
back from the 1930s or something. And the little town of
That
Kuchara
is-
has like an inn, with a restaurant, and that was like the big spot.
What would be your subject in a church like that?
I actually went through the Apollo space program, and so it was the 50th anniversary of the lunar landing, and I brought about how Buzz Aldrin celebrated communion on the moon. And so I went through all the different aspects of faith, and so you had Apollo 8 was the first lunar launch to go around the moon. Sort of easy to remember because if you do a figure 8 around the Earth and the moon. So Apollo 8 was the first one. An astronaut is someone who goes 62 miles above the Earth, or 100 kilometers. And so 560 people have gone 62 miles above the Earth's surface. But only 24 have broken out of the Earth's gravitational pull and gone toward the moon. And you need a Saturn V rocket to do that. And this thing is a football field long, developed by Vernon von Braun. I actually spoke at the Kennedy Space Center at an event years ago. They rented out the whole museum. One of the other speakers was astronaut Bob Stewart, Army general. He flew on the Challenger and the Atlantis, but the dinner was underneath of this Saturn V rocket. I mean, it's like enormous.
Oh, my goodness.
And
Yeah.
anyway, so Apollo 8 is the first one to break out of the Earth's orbit, goes around the moon. It's Christmas 1968, and as they're coming back, Frank Borman and Bill Anders and Jim Lovell read the first 8 lines from the book of Genesis live over the radio to 100 million people listening.
I miss those days.
And he says, to all you on earth, we have a message for you. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the earth. And God said, let there be light, and there was light. And so they read this, and
Did they have permission?
No, they just thought, well, 98% of the country is Christian,
Yeah.
And so Madeline Murray O'Hare, an atheist.
Yes,
She's the
I
one who
remember
got
her, too.
prayer taken out of schools and Bible taken out of schools. She sued on behalf of her son, William J. Murray, who since grew up, became a Christian,
Yeah.
and now he's a minister, and now he has the Religious Freedom Foundation, and he's trying to defend Christians in the Middle East and where they're being persecuted by, you know, fundamental Islamic countries. But anyway, so Madalyn Murray O'Hair's threat of a lawsuit caused NASA to say, okay, from now on, anything spiritual, ask to turn the mic off. And so they land on the moon. Buzz Aldrin, Neil Armstrong, Apollo 11. Mike Collins is in the Columbia, circling 30 some odd times at 57 miles above the Earth. He's the first man solo to go around the dark side of the moon. And he said, not since Adam has there been a man more alone than me, you know, because he cut off from radio contact with the Earth.
Right.
Anyway, so they land, and the lunar module has radar that's looking down at the ground to see where they're going to land, but there's a switch. The radar was also looking up at the Columbia in case they had to abort the landing and hurry up and go back. And so the computer was dithering. In other words, the computer was getting a radar signal from one looking down and one looking up at the same time. And so the computer starts malfunctioning. Now, the computer, there's more memory in your phone than they had in that
Absolutely, today.
And so they're almost going to abort the landing, but then they just switch the computer off and they manually land the lunar module.
Wow.
Neil Armstrong's at the control looking out the window. Buzz Aldrin is calling out the altitude and the speed, and they're going too fast. And so they're passing up landing marks, and so then where they're going to land, there's a bunch of boulders, and they're running out of fuel. And so now they could just run out and just dump on and then the propulsion jets are kicking up moon dust. And so now they're looking through this cloud trying to land this thing, not hitting the boulders. They do successfully land it. And before they get out of this lunar module onto the Earth's surface, Buzz Aldrin says, I'd like to request radio silence, and for those of you that are on Earth, I'd ask that you commemorate this great event in your own way. And he turns it off and he celebrates communion. He went to Houston Webster Presbyterian Church near Houston. It's called the Astronauts Church because John Glenn and Roger Chaffee, a bunch of astronauts went there. And the pastor, Dean Woodruff, had given him a little silver goblet cup to take with him. They celebrated communion at the church. He saved a piece of bread in a plastic pouch and had a little plastic thing full of grape juice. And every astronaut got to bring a couple personal items with them. Neil Armstrong brought a little jeweled pin that the widows of Apollo 1 gave him. So Apollo 1 burns up on the launch pad.
Yeah, I remember that.
And so the widows give Neil Armstrong. So he takes that to the moon to represent those three astronauts. But Buzz Aldrin brought the communion elements, and he opens up the little scripture that he had written, John 15, I am the vine, you are the branches, you could do nothing apart from me. And then he eats the bread and he pours the grape juice in 1/6 gravity. In other words, it comes out real slow. You can watch it coming out, and then it curls in the bottom of the cup. You can watch it curl. And then he celebrates communion. And then, of course, they step off. So Neil Armstrong is off first. One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Buzz Aldrin is second. Members of his church had made the flag, and they put it in. It could only go about 6 inches deep because of the powdery stuff. And so he does a West Point salute at the flag. They get back in the module, and with these bulky life support suits that has refrigeration coils, because it can get 150 degrees on the moon when you're in the direct sunlight, and then when you're in the shadow, it can get freezing, And when they're getting back in, they kick the instrument panel and break a circuit breaker that happens to be the circuit breaker that controls the ignition of the rockets to get off the moon. And they're starting to panic, but then they're able to take a felt tip pen and push it back in place.
Oh my goodness.
And then there's the space race. So the Russians, they launched Sputnik in 1957, first man-made satellite. Then the Russians in 1961 launched Yuri Gagarin, the first human to orbit the Earth. And we have Alan Shepard be the first one up, and John Glenn first one on our side to circle. Well, this lunar landing, the Russians don't have a manned lunar landing attempt, but they launch an unmanned lunar landing attempt at the same time. And so they have Luna 15 that is actually going to the moon like at the same time that our guys are. And Buzz Aldrin, Neil Armstrong land, and they're trying to land their Luna 15, and they're trying to get as close to where the Americans are. So we're in the Sea of Tranquility. The next sea over is the Sea of Crisis, right? So it's called Mar Crisium, but it's the Sea of Crisis, Sea of Tranquility. And 2 hours before Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong launch off the moon, this Luna 15 crashes into the moon, right? They must have hit a mountain or something that was standing up. But I mean, it could have hit the lunar module, you know?
I have never heard this.
And
is this, I mean...
Oh yeah, you can look it up, Luna 15. But they're coming back to Earth, and Buzz Aldrin does say this is more than a mission of 3 men to the moon. He said, a verse of Psalms comes to mind. When I consider the heavens, the work of thy fingers, and the moon and the stars which thou hast ordained, what is man that thou art mindful of him, or the son of man that thou visitest him? And so he does read a scripture over to the 100 some odd million that are listening on Earth.
Wow, isn't that neat?
And now Apollo 12 spent 31 hours on the moon, and the astronauts that were involved in that, you know, many of them had faith. Apollo 13 had an oxygen tank blow up, and Nixon had a day of prayer for the nation. Apollo 14 left a microfilm copy of the King James Bible on the moon. The astronauts
I didn't know
did
that.
Yes, the first lunar Bible. But it's the King James Bible. They just shrunk every page to put it all on one little.
Isn't that neat? That's
and
great.
then Apollo 15, astronaut Jim Irwin, he was a nominal Christian. He was doing some experiment, and it wasn't working right, and he was running out of time, and he said that he was starting to panic, and he said a prayer, and he said he could feel that as if the Lord was right there with him. And he said he almost felt like turning around, he would see him, and he said he felt the presence of the Lord. And obviously the experiment went well, and he comes back to Earth, and he becomes an evangelical minister. Another astronaut was Alan Bean, B-E-A-N, and he becomes a painter. And he does moonscapes, these beautiful paintings of the moon. And one of them is titled We Came in Peace, but it's an astronaut on his knees with his hands folded, praying, and you can see the gold, mask on the reflection. It's just a beautiful painting.
Oh, wow.
But then Apollo 16 astronaut Charles Duke, and he comes back from being on the moon. He had some marriage problems, how they're dealing with all the fame, and he was listening to Christian radio, and while he was driving his car in Texas, and he pulls over and he says a prayer, and he said that Jesus came into his life. Wow. And so he was speaking in 96, but he said, I used to think going to the moon was the crowning glory of my career, but he says, that doesn't compare with my walk with Jesus.
Amen.
And then he said that he could live 1,000 years and never do something as great as walking on the moon, but he says, it doesn't compare with my walk with Jesus, which is an everyday walk. And it took billions of dollars to put a man on the moon, but he says, you can meet Jesus for free right where you're at. He says, I found Jesus in my car driving by New Braunfels, Texas. And I love the quote from astronaut Jim Irwin. He says, Jesus walking on Earth is more important than man walking on the moon.
Wow, that's beautiful. Yeah.
But anyway, I went through this at that church there, and
well,
that was amazing.
Every time I have William Federer on,
I know.
I sit.
That was
in
a great question.
Total amazement at the recall that you have.
Yeah.
It is such a God gift.
Well, it's a great little church, Kuchara Christian Fellowship, and Pastor Mike Christian and his wife.
Where does that name come, Kuchara?
I'm sure it's an Indian name.
Okay,
Yeah,
so it's in that
sounds like
location,
it.
Yeah, up by La Vida.
Yeah, by the way, he has his own radio program. You have television program.
Right. Faith in History.
And you have a minute.
Yes, it's a radio spot
Yeah.
called American Minute, and it's aired on the BOTT radio network, BOTT, and numerous other different stations. And there's Salem has a crosswalk email they send out, and so they, you can sign up for different devotional lists, and so they send it out as a text every day.
Wow.
And then I have my own Facebook and Twitter and so
Yeah.
forth. You can sign up at AmericanMinute.com
And how many books have you written? And you've
it's over-
co-authored some, but how many have you written?
It's over 20.
Wow.
And my wife and I are finishing up a new one on the faith that shaped America, and it will chronicle all the revivals. And I'll have to come back.
Oh, you
and
get
do
you
that.
get a oh yeah. I just it's my, I'm sorry, it's my treat every time I have him. I know you folks out there enjoy it, but I enjoy it as much as you do, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But I was just thinking about the political agenda we have today. 'Cause I let him read one of my bad letters because Christians out there, I think, say that Christians should never mention politics. Well, if you watch this program, I mention politics. Sorry. In fact, this person said I'm putting my checkbook away and never to open it again, so bye-bye. But let me tell you, Christians need to hear truth, and the Democrats, I call them the Democrats, have no truth. And I have no idea how a born-again, blood-bought Christian can say, I just voted for Hillary. Really? I mean, I can't get my head around that one.
Well, one of the things I've done, and there's a book, Change to Change, and a couple other ones, where I talk about world history. I talk about the most common form of government is a king, excuse me, Pharaoh, Caesar, Kaiser, Sultan, Tsar, and they keep getting bigger because with military advancements you can kill more people.
Yeah.
Iron stronger than bronze, and phalanx spears and scimitar swords. And the weapon changes, but the function remains the same. The fallen, selfish human nature of Cain, kill, and Abel with a rock. It's just
Right.
magnified through technology. St. Augustine called it libido dominandi, the lust to dominate. And so you put some babies in a playpen, one takes the rattle from the others. You put some kids on a playground, one is the bully hogging the ball. You put some junior high girls in a clique, and one of them is the diva. You put some people in the woods, one of them is an Indian chief, put them in an inner city, one of them is a gang leader. And all a king is a glorified gang leader. So it's a pyramid structure to society. If you're friends with the king, you're more equal. You're not friends with the king, you're less equal. You're an enemy of the king, you're dead. It's called treason. And it just happens. And the problem is it's in each of our own DNA. So I tell people, imagine if you were the king. That'd be pretty neat. And then you have a sister that you really love, and she has a teenage son, and he starts hanging around the wrong kids, drinking and driving and partying, and he's driving the car and hits someone and kills him. And now this teenager is facing mandatory prison. And your sister comes begging to you and says, you're not going to let my little Johnny get locked away, are you? What are you going to say to your sister? Well, I'll let little Johnny off the hook this time, but don't let it happen again. Guess what? As soon as you say that, you are the corrupt dictator. You just sent ripples through your kingdom that if you're family or friends with the king, you get special treatment. You're not family and friends, you don't get it. And if someone wants to point out your favoritism, you're going to be tempted to want to shut them up. So it just happens because it's in, and it just keeps getting bigger until the King of England had the biggest. 13 million square miles, they have 1 billion people, all of India, Australia, New Zealand,
How
Hong
large?
Kong. Is 13.5 million square miles. I mean, anyway, but it was global. So you had, the sun never set on the British Empire.
Yeah.
And so America's founders decided they did not like this globalist king telling us what to do. And so they flipped it and made the people the king. So it's a polarity change in the flow of power. Instead of top down, it's bottom up. Instead of a king ruling through administrators, it's we the people. And then I go in the books, where did the founders get this idea that the people could rule themselves? From the New England pastors, from the Mayflower, and where did they get their ideas from? The Bible. But what part of the Bible? The first 400 years when Israel came out of Egypt, before they got King Saul. And so this was the first instance in world history of a nation with millions of people and no king. And so they were all ruled by the law, and the law said everyone's equal, and everyone was taught the law. It's almost like everybody downloads a behavioral app on their iPhone. Instead of a GPS telling you where to turn, it tells you how to act. And it's doing it in real time, right? It says, no, don't steal that, don't lie to this person, don't, you know. Right. And so the Levites are the computer geeks that help you to download this app. But then the thought is, why would you follow it? What would motivate you to deny yourself yielding to a temptation? Well, ancient Israel introduces the key ingredient. There is a God who is watching everyone. He wants you to be fair, and he is going to hold you accountable in the future. So you're about to steal, nobody's around, and then you think, God is watching me. He wants me to be fair. He's going to hold me accountable. Maybe I should hesitate stealing. And it creates something in your head called a conscience. If everybody in the country really believes this, you can maintain complete order with no police.
That's right.
Women can go anywhere without fear, security for life and property. So you take the power of the king, separate it into the hands of the people. It's chaos unless each person is taught the law. Why do they follow the law? The God of the Bible. And so this is the model that these New England pastors look back to, that they set up the form of government in America. And the word politics comes from the word polis, which is Greek for city. Just the business of the city. And the word citizen means co-king. And so what happened in New England? You had pastors fleeing religious persecution in Europe. And they would come to America with their churches. And so you had a pastor, Roger Williams, and his church founded Providence, Rhode Island, and the first Baptist church in America. Reverend Thomas Hooker and his Congregationalist church founded Hartford, Connecticut. And so here you have pastors, and when they get to those little areas, the church members come to the pastor and say, Pastor, can you preach a sermon on how we're supposed to do the government thing? Right? Mm-hmm. And the pastor, Thomas Hooker, says, okay, the foundation of authority is laid in the free consent of the people. It's not laid in some king that's appointing all these administrators and it's top down. No, it's bottom up. It's we the people. So the Mayflower Compact says, we covenant ourselves together to form a civil body politic. So there are a bunch of Christians, there's no king-appointed person, and they form their political body. And this influenced all these New England colonies, so much so that they basically took their congregational church form of government and they made it their community form of government. So instead of the clergy-laity model of church government, the clergy does all the ministry and the laity is lazy and they just watch. No, it's this congregational model where everybody in the congregation is part of the body of Christ, everybody's involved in the ministry, and everybody is involved in some area of leadership, teaching Sunday school, right, and then they're rising up into responsibility. So this church model of government became the community model. And so Connecticut was called the Constitution State. It became a model for the U.S. Constitution. So when they say, well, you got to have separation of church and state. Wait a second. In New England, it was the church that created the state.
Which is a liberal bastion now.
Yeah. But I mean, think of it. How could you say, Pastor Thomas Hooker, don't get involved in politics, when it's his sermon that's their constitution? Mm-hmm. They used Pastor Thomas Hooker's sermon. It's called the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut. They used his sermon as the Constitution for from 1639 up until 1818, almost 200 years. And anyway, so now it's the people in America rule, but it's not just people individually, it's people in covenant with each other. Now, and this is where it gets interesting. So the ancient Israel, the people were in a covenant with each other. And the covenant is an agreement that people have with each other in getting rights from God and accountable to God. Mm-hmm. That is what they had in New England. It was a Puritan covenant, right? Is people in agreement with each other, getting rights from God, accountable to God. In the next century, covenant turned into social contract. People in agreement with each other, with or without God. If he's there, fine. If he's not there, fine. In the next century, it turned into the French Revolution and Marxism, and it was people in agreement with each other intentionally without God. And that meant that the state was God. And so the French Revolution, they chopped off 40,000 heads of people in Paris. And that gave birth to Marxism and communism, where the state is God. And there's a quote from Jean-Jacques Rousseau, the father of the French Revolution. He says, if the state says that someone must die, then he must die, because his life is a gift conditionally given from the state.
Oh, wow.
So then you get communist Pol Pot in Cambodia, where he says, keeping you is no gain, losing you is no loss, so he kills a third of his country. So what happens, you go from a covenant, rights from God, accountable to God, to a social contract without God, turns into a socialist state with a dictator, and then you get this communism. And so, the key is God. Mm-hmm. And so once there's no God, the state becomes God. And your worth as a person is only if you can contribute to the state.
The 20 Democrats that are running for president right now believe what you talked about without God.
Right. They're wanting to put back in place a pyramid structure to society. So if you're in the deep state elite ruling class, you get special rights. And the common people, their whole life is going to be dictated by the state. You know, all the socialist countries in Europe, they all have royalties. Sweden has royalty, Denmark has royalty, Holland has royalty, Greece has. So socialism always has a royalty ruling class. It's not equal, right? It's not equal. So the idea is you have to have God there to have rights from a source higher than the government, and a God that you're accountable to. Otherwise, your life as a person is only of value if you can contribute to the group. And if the group thinks that you're not contributing, or if the group thinks you're a threat, then your life is worth less. And then you're either persecuted or audited, or your freedoms of speech are taken away, and ultimately you're relegated to a second-class status or even killed.
They just did a poll. 57% of Democrats believe the socialist way is better than the free enterprise. 57%.
We're heading that way, aren't we?
Yeah, it's amazing the amnesia that people have. That just a relatively short time ago, you had Pol Pot and Stalin and Ho Chi Minh and Castro, all these socialist countries just dominating people's lives. And why would we want to implement that?
But then they say, look what religion has done. How many people have died?
Well, the attitude is, are all political parties the same? No. Well, are all religions the same? Well, no. Well, let's look at them. The Judeo-Christian faith says that you have a worth independent of your contributions to the state, simply because you're made in the image of God. Amen. And the Judeo-Christian God says you're all equal because everyone's made in this image of this God.
Right.
Wow. Jesus Christ is the answer to every need you may have. God bless. Bye-bye.